Welcome to the newest episode of Beatin' and Bangin'. I'm your host, Kyle Dalton. In today's video, we're going to take a look into the eye-popping remarks on Monday by Chase Elliott about the future of Stewart-Haas Racing. Plus, I have a story on Briscoe's former teammate, Kevin Harvick, and what he had to say on his podcast about the need for dirtier driving. Plus, we're now 13 weeks into the 2024 Cup Series campaign, or the halfway mark of the regular season. In my By the Numbers segment, we're going to dive into a variety of categories that will provide you with a good idea of how the drivers, teams, and manufacturers have performed up until this point. However, before we get to that, let's go back to Monday and Chase Briscoe's appearance on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio. During his visit, the 29-year-old talked about his season-best performance at Darlington, where he finished 5th. During that conversation, the driver unexpectedly brought up uncertainty at SHR, to which the show host followed up and asked him about that uncertainty.
Yeah, I think there's obviously concern anytime there's rumors, right? That's the big thing. I think there's just a lot of uncertainty. Nobody, really knows what's going on. I certainly don't know what's going on at our place either. I'm confident that if SHR is still around, I feel like I've proven myself enough that they would keep me on here. But yeah, definitely. I think anytime that there's this many rumors going around, right, like you start to get a little nervous, and that's the big thing, is just not knowing and not really hearing anything. You just try to go out there and audition every week, and I feel like you can be on a 5-year deal and you're still trying to audition every week. But certainly when there's all the rumors going around, you certainly feel like every week's an audition and a trial for something different. So yeah, I don't know where I stand just because I haven't really heard anything. So I'm just trying to go out there every week and kind of control what I can control, and try to run up front like we did at Darlington and kind of prove my worth to the sport. And, that's all I can do at the end of the day.
Of all the things he said, this stuck out to me. If SHR is still around. Think about that. He's hearing the rumors like everyone that the 4-car team could be in the market for selling a charter or two. But he went so far as to say if it was around at all. But as he also said, he's treating every race like it's an audition. I know I've heard this silly season could be really silly. Michael McDowell was the first domino to fall last week. I expect there to be a lot more silliness in the coming months ahead. Moving on to our next story and Chase Briscoe's former SHR teammate, Kevin Harvick. Happy on his Happy Hour podcast actually talked about Briscoe's remarks and his uncertainty about the future of the organization. But I think the most interesting comment the 2014 champion had to say was talking about drivers taking a more aggressive approach on the track. Take a listen.
I said it's time for Brad Keselowski to get dirty. I mean, he's got to get dirty right here. If he can't make the pass, if he has the opportunity, he has to race dirty. And yeah, I've raced dirty. And you know what? A lot of the other guys have raced dirty, and some of them need to race dirtier. They need to get more aggressive, and they need to throw caution to the wind.
Listening to Harvick's remarks, I could only think back to a couple years ago and what Kyle Busch had to say on the subject.
The 4 was about running over everybody. He didn't make very many friends out there today. So that just kind of goes to show what you got to do in these races, and it doesn't matter whose feelings you hurt and what's going to come back on you next week. We saw it with me last year. The 4 dumped me at Martinsville, so can't say that I've been guilty of that yet. There's some dirty dudes out there.
And now it's time to move on to our By the Numbers segment. And we're going to start with our last 5 race analysis. There's been significant movement at the top from last week's analysis. Let's take a look at last week, and you can see Chase Elliott was holding strong with an average finishing position of 5.4, with 4 of his last 5 races in the top 5. This week, the most popular driver remains at the top, but his numbers have dropped a bit after his 12th place result at Darlington. But what's interesting is to see how there's been a lot of changes happening in the rest of the top 10. Brad Keselowski, with his win at the Lady in Black, slots in at number 2 this week with an average finishing position of 9.2, jumping all the way up from 10th last week. Tyler Reddick, who was second in our first 2 last 5 race reviews, drops to 7th. His average position of 13.6 significantly affected by his 32nd at Darlington. Noah Gragson comes in at number 3 at 10 even, moving up from 5th and 11.2 the week before, and is followed by Martin Truex Jr., who remained in the 4th spot for a 3rd consecutive week. Chase Briscoe moves up to 5th after being 9th the week before, and is followed by Alex Bowman, Reddick, William Byron, Kyle Busch, and cracking the top 10 for the last 5 races is Denny Hamlin at 15.4. We all know Ford got its first win of the season at Darlington, but based on the last 5 races, you can see with 3 drivers inside the top 10 that the Blue Ovals are picking up the pace and trending in the right direction. Speaking of Fords, let's take a glance at the manufacturers and how they've stacked up through the first half of the regular season. Obviously, wins are most important, and Chevrolet is leading the way with 7, with the Toyotas close behind at 5. Keselowski got the Blue Ovals off the snide at Darlington. What's interesting is in the rest of the top metrics measured, Ford is pretty equal, even better in second-place finishes. I'm sure they would trade in some of those runner-ups for a win or 2. But overall, it's fairly even across all 3 manufacturers, with Toyota lagging in top 20s being the most significant gap between them. I'll really be interested to see what these numbers look like later in the year. Sticking with a higher level view of the teams, and you can see through the first 13 races, it's been the Hendrick-Gibbs show, with several one-offs thrown in for good measure. I know I've heard various pundits predicting that it's going to be like this for the rest of the year, but I don't know that it is. I think RFK has been solid in the last few weeks and could upset that theory. Maybe 2311 Racing joins in. Maybe Team Penske gets it together in the second half like they've done the last 2 seasons. Guess we'll just have to wait and see. Now, let's break those numbers down on an individual driver level, and we're going to start from a bigger picture, beginning with top 20 finishes. As you can see, Chase Elliott has been Mr. Consistency the first half of the season, batting 1,000 and the only driver to finish inside the top 20 in every race. If we had done this last week, Martin Truex Jr. would have joined Elliott at 13, but his 25th place finish at Darlington ended that streak. Tied for third with 11 top 20s are Alex Bowman, Ty Gibbs, and Ross Chastain. And rounding out the top 10 and top 20s with 10 apiece are Denny Hamlin, William Byron, Ryan Blaney, Chris Buescher, Chase Briscoe, and Noah Gragson. Moving on to top 10s, and there's some names here that weren't inside the top 20s, including Christopher Bell, Brad Keselowski, and Kyle Larson. Interestingly, at the top of this category are 2 of Larson's Hendrick Motorsports teammates, William Byron and Alex Bowman, with 8 apiece. When it comes to top 5 finishes, Larson sits atop all alone with 6 and is followed by Elliott, Hamlin, and Keselowski with 5 each. You can see the rest of those in the top 10 are many of the same cast of characters, with the addition of reigning Cup Series champ Ryan Blaney. I think this just goes to show that when he's good, he's really good. And lastly, on the individual drivers is wins. And as you can imagine, based on our team wins graphic just a few minutes earlier, it's dominated by the HMS and Gibbs boys, with William Byron and Denny Hamlin leading the way with 3 wins each, followed by Kyle Larson and his pair of victories, and the 4 drivers who have earned 1 win each, including Keselowski last Sunday at Darlington. Combining all those wins, top 5s, top 10s, top 20s, and every other finishing position for all 13 races, and we get our average finishing position. And it's pretty dang interesting. Here's a look at all of them and their manufacturer alliances. Chase Elliott is third on the HMS totem pole when it comes to wins, with just the 1 at Texas. But as discussed a few minutes ago in top 20 finishes, the 28-year-old has been consistent throughout 2024. His worst finish all season, a 19th at Phoenix. As a result, he has the best average finishing position of 9.8. Truex is on the number 9's heels at 10.2, and then there's a gap of 2 positions that is occupied by Ty Gibbs. The 21-year-old has been impressive this year with his 4 top 5s, including his career best runner-up last weekend at Darlington. A pair of HMS drivers follow in William Byron and Kyle Larson. But I think the next 2 drivers are the most interesting inside the top 10. Denny Hamlin has received a lot of attention, and deservedly so, with his 3 wins. But his 12.7 average finishing position is tied with Alex Bowman, who has received a lot less attention because he's the 4th car at HMS. The 48's numbers show outside of a couple of rough finishes at Texas and Atlanta, Bowman has been pretty good with 8 top 10s and 4 inside the top 5. If Bowman keeps running inside the top 10 and knocking on the door, he just might find himself making a trip to victory lane 2. Ross Chastain comes in next at 13.5, and the first Ford inside the top 10 in average running position is a surprise. It's not Keselowski or Ryan Blaney, but Chase Briscoe at 14.5. And Tyler Reddick rounds out the top 10. Moving a little further down, and there are some other notable numbers, including Noah Gragson having a better average finishing position than Bubba Wallace, Christopher Bell, Joey Logano, and Atlanta race winner Daniel Suarez. Take a look behind Suarez, and the two other SHR drivers are tied at 20.5 each. How appropriate. And finally, let's take a look at our Rookie of the Year candidates with Josh Berry, Carson Hocevar, and Zane Smith. The number 71 team has struggled all season with just 2 finishes inside the top 20. Unless something dramatically changes, Smith isn't going to win. That means it's down to Berry and Hocevar, and at this juncture in the season, it's a close one. But based on average finishing position alone, Berry edges out the 21-year-old by 1 spot. All right, guys, that'll do it for this episode. I want to get your thought on what Chase Briscoe had to say on SiriusXM. Where there's smoke, there's typically fire, right? And what about what Harvick had to say about drivers getting dirtier? Agree or disagree? And lastly, let me know what you think of our analysis of the regular season halfway mark. Did you find any surprises in there? Remember, if you want to read my written work, go check it out at heavy.com. If you want to sign up for my email newsletter, you can do that at beatingandbanging.com, and you'll get an email each Friday with a recap of the top NASCAR news from the week, including what was said on the various NASCAR-related podcasts. Also, be sure and go check out my Beating and Banging podcast on the Blue Wire Network. You can find it on your favorite listening platform. And finally, I want to wrap up this episode with a little tribute to my mother. She would have turned 84 today. Happy birthday, Mom. I love and miss you.